Hello, everybody. This is Ross McGill. You may know me as Teacher Toolkit on my website, teachertoolkit.co.uk, or on social media. This is a webinar in collaboration with Opogo, and what I would hope to go through with you over the next hour, so obviously this will be recorded so you can pause and play and watch it later, is look at the hallmarks of effective professional development, some insights from my own work across the UK, and offer some solutions threaded throughout, but largely towards the end. You should be able to see at least the slides. I'm not going to play it in full mode. I'm just going to kind of show it to you, as you can see on the screen. I'm not going to show you a video of me, but I'll just pop my face up on the screen so that you can probably see that I'm here. I don't know how that appears at your end. And in the bottom right hand corner, or whatever your dialog box is, I'm going to just pose a number of questions just to get some initial feedback from you. So very teacher, all kind of secondary school based, pretty much in London, and for the last 2 years I've been teacher training full-time in schools all across the country, and in parts of Europe and soon to be in other parts of the world. So it's been quite a fascinating couple of years for me, and I hope to kind of share some of my research, some doctorate research, as well as the work that I've been conducting in lots of schools. If you want to share some, all the usual channels for me, plus Opogo's, but that's my social media handle at Teacher Toolkit, and you can use that hashtag if you wish. Send me an email. So the email address for me personally is support@teachertoolkit.co.uk, and we can catch up if there's something that you want to ask. So context, I want you to be aware of cognitive dissonance. Not many people may be familiar with that term, but it's broadly disagreeing with something. So you might hear some things that you disagree with. That's a deliberate decision on my part. I also fully understand the challenges that schools are under with funding pressure and so on and so forth. So what matters is why and how, not necessarily. So two key things. I want to kind of divide the next hour into two parts, highlight some research, some you may be familiar with, some new research also, and some solutions in the current climate of school funding and teachers trying to have access to more and more professional development, or at least research informed. So give you a quick, I've managed to get to 10 different countries around the world, 15,000 teachers, a close up on different schools, at least in all different contexts, pretty much all, as many locations as possible. I've yet to get to the kind of northeast and Cumbria, so if you're watching from there, all in good time, I hope. But primary, independent and secondary, all sorts, different sizes. I'll share as much as I can, but I'll kind of also share some very common threads from school to school. Now, you are the third group of people in the entire world to see that's going to be published in my new book. So some of the head teachers I've conducted some face-to-face interviews with, as well as some teacher training work. This was just a response to a poll that I sent out to them, and this is going to be published in my new book from September. What are the challenges that head teachers particularly say they are facing, and their strengths? So if I just stay straight in keeping with this webinar to the challenges, you'll see at the foot of the slide, it's having access to the latest research-led practice and assessment, which I found quite interesting. And you can see the obvious strengths there. We're very good at supporting kids' mental health, curriculum, teaching and learning. But research-led practice, why? Teachers, school leaders are time poor and have insufficient cash to be able to do that. Now, I'll come back to all this later. This is my so gathering some data online as well as in the room with teachers in schools that I visit. Teachers pretty much struggle with coping with their own well-being, stroke mental health, as well as the challenges of meeting pupils' mental health. And I guess with diminishing resources and funding, less staff, that's not going to be a problem that's going to fix anytime soon. Again, more slides later, another common thread is teachers, time poor. They have very little time to access research, disseminate it, and then translate it into their own context. So that would be a top recommendation from me. If you want to find out a short code, so if you just type in bit.ly/CPD pack, and that must have a capital CPD, it'll take you to a link on my website with loads of resources that I share in my staff training sessions. And if I visit school and see something that's worth putting in the kind of Google document, which it is behind the scenes, you can grab stuff there and download it and look at it a little bit later. So, aware of some of these headlines, but some people often don't know the full details. And the reason I share these is to kind of how we can change the narrative and also come up with some solutions. In my opinion, with my social audience, 250,000 followers, challenge national organisations. This is the Department for Education. It's published every June or July, so there's going to be some more data coming out soon. And we often hear in the press that teachers, so I'm just going to switch my pointer on so you can see where I'm talking to. So I'm looking in the middle here. We often hear that teachers leave within the first 5 years, but actually the data, the greatest attrition happens in the first 2 or 3 years, but obviously we won't tell the public that. It sounds a huge waste of cash. And broadly speaking, if you're in the profession every year, your chances of staying in the profession, regardless of your age, drop down 2% year on year. So I'm way off the scale here, 25 years, down to probably about 38%, something like that. Something else to be aware of. So we've also got some international data. So this is the number of hours that teachers work in all these 30 or so 35 jurisdictions. Again, let me just put my pointer back on. So if you look at this left-hand column here, just about here, we've got the number of hours that teachers work. We've got England and Singapore, and then we have, where is Finland? I've lost track. There we go, right at the bottom. Okay. So a huge number of hours. But what's quite interesting is when you look at these jurisdictions, which are often cited as best practice, the number of inset days is very, very interesting. So again, here's how to get rid of those sketches. There we go. Professional development a teacher receives every academic year. If you go down the list to about number 10, you've got Singapore. We often hear about teachers in Singapore, 12 and just over 12 days. And England, way down at the bottom, lagging on 4 or 5 professional days per academic year. So there's not enough. And with lack of school funding, that problem's going to not go away. And in some of the best practice that I've seen on my travels, schools are disaggregating these 3 or 4 days, apart from the general introduction to the start of the year, getting ready. They are now collapsing the timetable on a Wednesday afternoon or Friday afternoon or whatever suits your school, and having regular professional development sessions. If you're familiar with research in terms of students' retrieval practice, cognitive overload, cognitive load theory, it's great for our techniques in the classroom in terms of revision and teaching, effective teaching, but we don't seem to do it for ourselves when it comes to professional development. So the schools that are now switching to this system where they have regular CPD every week, whether that's all together as a department or together as an entire staff, it gives us more opportunity to revisit content. So what's science research? So this is some research from a colleague I work with at Cambridge. So Jude Brady, her research published last year, compared the number of hours or the working conditions of independent teachers on this slide versus state school teachers. And although both types of teachers in different contexts will work the same number of hours, in excess of 55 hours per week, the research highlighted that teachers don't necessarily mind working long hours. The key difference between independent and state school teachers was that state school teachers to complete meaningless tasks. So the challenge here for us all, school leaders as well as the government, is how do we switch from this high stakes accountability model to reward our teachers to do the job that they can in the normal working week, where the task is rewarding rather than this evidence type gathering. A question here from me is, does it feel any better? You know, you look at the DfE workload survey, apparently in all different areas of our profession, we are working less hours. Now, before you choke at the screen, that's, however, we're far away from kind of solving the workload problem that we have in our profession. A little bit later, so this came from Education Policy Institute not so long ago. You'll be familiar that more pupils are entering, predicted to enter the system in 2025, and we're going to need 47,000 teachers in the year 2025. And as you can see from this graph, there are more teachers, so back to the workforce census, more teachers left teaching in England than ever before for the first time ever. Okay, so a little bit more, so I'm going to move on to some CPD research. Quite startling too. So any teachers that are in your school who are in their first, second or third year, as you all know, they will leave the profession pretty quick. So it's critical, if you've got an NQT in your school, they probably need a little bit more than just NQT induction. And yes, the early careers framework, if you're watching from England, where that comes into place in a couple of years' time. Again, it could be too late for new teachers in the profession today, but this statistic's quite telling. The teachers are leaving in increasing proportion year on year. Tiny little, so that's kind of a little snapshot. If you want to look at the link, this is from the National Foundation of Education Research. If we look at the second graph on the left, the leaving rate's increasing. Teacher training entries, the second graph on the right hand side. So let me just make sure you can, I don't know if you can see this on the screen. The teacher training targets are missed year on year, and the vacancy rate is increasing. We cite it's poor behaviour. Yes, the poor behaviour exists, but actually why teachers leave the profession is for workload and school inspection pressure rather than salary and behaviour, even though all are valid and all exist. The greatest reason is workload. So for school leaders watching, we need to radically reduce the number of things that we ask our teachers to do, and that kind of very much informs my research, my own thinking, my blogs, my work with my books and teacher training. Familiar with this good book called The Teacher Gap, written by Professor Becky Allen, former Institute of Education, and Dr. Sam Sims. It's a great read for the summer, and maybe buy one for your leadership team, have a look. There's some great solutions in here for tackling at a national level in England teacher attrition. You may want to get one or two great ideas here for your own school setting. And there are some schools tackling it quite well. Of the 100+ schools that I've met, broadly speaking, they all face recruitment challenges, but there are one or two that don't seem to have a problem. And the interesting thing is here, does that correlate with the intake or Ofsted rating or whatever it might be? I'll just signpost this graph in the corner of this slide. In the first 3 years, based on this research, teachers generally reach their optimum performance, and that stays at that level for a decade plus. So again, going back to the first, second or third years in your school, this is where they need the most intervention, not just NQT induction. They need a little bit more. So perhaps in some of the schools that I've visited, and maybe in your school, there is a teaching and learning team surrounding the assistant head who's responsible for teaching and learning, or the deputy, and offering some mentoring on top of NQT mentoring as well. Proportion of teachers in England agree that the issues for CPD, well, if you look on the left at the bottom of this slide, it conflicts with the work timetable, the schedule, your deadlines. External CPD is too expensive, or it's expensive to get people in, or there's no incentives for teachers to participate. So those are the kind of greatest barriers for teachers. The signpost are the best cited piece of research in England, at least, over the last 4 or 5 years. Some of you may be familiar with it. But why do we need to look at CPD research, not just nationally, but also in your school? Well, some schools have switched to research inquiry for appraisal, for example, where they're, rather than 3 binary targets, they're looking at a question posed by the teacher, critiqued by a line manager and a group of coaches, and that then informs their appraisal. But it's a kind of MA level type research question to enrich their practice, but also enrich the school. Why? But well, these reasons. Often the appraisals or research into CPD has no evidence base. It doesn't focus on kids. It lacks quality. And what we look, when we look beyond our own jurisdiction, we are way behind international colleagues. My gut is lack of funding is not going to help that. So here's a piece of research from the, now this is 4 years old, and we have come quite away from this, but there's some 6 or 7 hallmarks that I just want to share with you in case you're not familiar with. Some of you will maybe, if you're watching from England, you may be a member of the Teacher Development Trust. So when I was a deputy head, when the Teacher Development Trust kind of first was created, 2009, 2010, I helped David Weston, the chief executive, form this great framework following the kind of bronze, silver, gold methodology. If you're not part of it, please consider it, because it's the great network of schools, but they've got a great tool for evaluating your professional development. They come in and look at your work and give you a template. So they looked at over 980 reviews, then squeeze these down to broadly about 34 reports, and then looked at some patterns and differences. So these are the 7. So all altogether important that you have rhythmic CPD. It's not a one-off. Obviously, the CPD number 2 looks towards a long-term focus that aligns with your teacher's needs. Now, obviously, if you work in a large secondary school, you may have 5 or 10 teachers moving in your school population every year. Then it's very hard to keep on top of those things. If one person's in charge of teacher development and you have an entire group of staff in excess of 200, then that's a real challenge to move away from number 3, a one-size-fits-all. So how do you come up with a bespoke CPD program? So there are some schools that are getting this right. Number 4, subject knowledge, subject-specific pedagogy. Schools sharing, so English department leads English-led CPD for their English teachers or similar subjects, and it's revisited and so on and so forth, or through hubs of schools, particularly in large multi-academy trusts. 5, on the screen, sourcing external input. There is tons of stuff out at the moment. We've got Twitter on itself, social media. We've got Research Ed, we've got Woman Ed, we've got the Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic Network. You've got loads of networks and organisations for subjects. If you have the budget, get your staff signed up to various ones, share best practice in your school. Through number 6, collaborating and meeting regularly through your CPD sessions. Dare I say, 5 standalone inset days aren't going to cut it. And in some schools where they're kind of moving towards a more collaborative model, this also involves students being part of the inset day. And I know that particular topic is a bit hit and miss for some schools. This new piece was published last August. I've read this, it's a 26-page report. I've just read it over the last week, and I'm putting out a blog at the weekend if you want to read a 7 or 8 minute summary. So 3 points here. So this is in total contradiction to the research I've just shared with you from the academics who published the Teacher Development Trust research. Number 1, the consensus that those things work, so those 6 or 7 points that I just talked through, is wrong. 2, in particular, they have no detectable impact on pupil attainment. And 3, what I believe, and this has largely informed my work as a deputy head, but my work through schools for the last couple of years, is that one-to-one coaching and lots of different models of coaching, particularly instructional coaching or critical friendships, has a more, I'll choose my words carefully here, a more valuable experience for the teacher that could have challenge the norm for our professional development, that one-size-fits-all approach, but actually have a greater impact on the individual. Now, we'll know that, but how to put that in practice and how to develop a coaching culture in your school with the busy nature of school life and as we approach the exam season is a challenge. Here's something to consider. How much of your school budget is protected for professional development? So I'll give you an example. It's recommended that, and I know this is difficult in school funding climate, but even if we just consider 1% of your overall budget, what does that look like? So ask your head teacher, if you're not a head teacher watching this, or you should have a good handle on your figures already if you're a school leader watching. But here's an example school, a large secondary school. Our turnover was £8 million. That was at that time, so this is 2017, this was £1 million less in the 3 years previously. So £9 million in 2014. We had 220 staff. We set aside 1%, that's £80,000. So in my first year at that school, 2014, I had £100,000 as a budget. Now, that in this research with Teacher Development Trust, we were top of the list in terms of protecting CPD. I know that's far removed from many schools' budgets in reality, and over the 3 years, my time at school, that dropped to £25,000. But if we take that first £80,000, which is 1% of the £8 million turnover, that's divided by 220 staff, £360 each, which is pretty much how much you pay for an external course. So if you do everything internally, you budget for feeding your staff, because believe it or not, some schools don't feed their staff. You bring your own lunch to school, which is what you do for most days. So on an inset day, why should it be different? And controversial view, but I believe a cup of tea and a slice of cake is a really good thing to give to your staff. So you do the maths, 220 staff, £3 per head, which is pretty much just a kind of a roll, cup of coffee, and then a light lunch. You're looking at about £3,000 or £4,000 protected for feeding your staff over 5 traditional inset days. And then you've got quite a nice large sum of cash left behind for cover and for creative things. Now, I won't go into any more details here, just work out what your stats look like and work out the average spend is per member of staff. I think it's worth considering. So let's just switch it back. I'll just go back to here. These are the 6 development trusts: one size fits all, rhythmic CPD, sorry, not one size fits all, content aligned with pedagogy, subject specific, some external support. So let's go to the first one, rhythm. Now I'm going to try and launch a poll here. Now I haven't got data on my slides. I'm going to pop it up on your screen. How many hours does school allocate to CPD? So I think this should be here on your screen. So let me know, press what you think. If we take the 5 inset days that are traditional in England, equate to 25 hours. If you do that, then press that button if that's all you do. But maybe you dedicate more time. Let me know. So start voting. I've got 33% of you who have voted. Here we go. So sharing the results now. So I hope you can see these. So you can see that, so give you statistics your side. So there are 41 people registered for this webinar. 17 of you are watching it live. 60% of those 17 people are just sticking at the moment with 5 inset days a year. So for those people watching, what if we got rid of 2 of those inset days and then divided those 10 hours throughout the academic year? How could you fit that in? Is the bit of the headache there, I suppose, is after school on top of a busy schedule already, or send your kids home half an hour early on a Wednesday afternoon and then have an hour and a half as part of your meeting cycle with those 30 minutes that equate to those 2 lost days. You could pretty much spread that 10 hours out, half an hour each session, plus the hour after school, for a good 20 weeks throughout the academic year. So CPD every fortnight would be fantastic. A suggests school leaders must allocate time. If I think throughout the 10 years that I led professional development in 3 large secondary schools, my most frustrating part was when school life or other pressing priorities took over planned professional development, where lots of conversations are taking place behind the scenes to create longer term programs that worked, that were transparent and published, and then things got in the way and chucked them, and it kind of just says, I suppose, that it's not a priority. The route needs to be followed up. So our mark, plan, teach work at my last school, which now informs my new book, as we talked about something to do with marking, we let teachers go off and trial ideas, and then we came back to the ideas within the same half term, and then we ploughed through the content. Okay, next call. So I'm going to ask, try it again. What type of CPD is the approach in your organization? So you should see that on your screen. So I'll give you 20 seconds or so to vote. I'm hoping you can select more than one. So let's see. So there we go. Right, so here come the results. So here we've got a mixture of inset days, workshops, school leader at the front, and department teams. So CPD menu. So what I'll hope to share towards the end is some solutions for how, and again, I won't be able to cover it all here. So if you contact me through support@teachertoolkit.co.uk, I'll share as many resources and ideas and some strategy documents to show you how you could move towards a menu or research journal of some type, where you have regular CPD sessions planned that are transparent, staff arrive into your school, know what's available, and you can get to a place where all staff are contributing with their peers in their own small forums, rather than a member of staff being fearful of sharing in front of other staff who maybe needed from your staff. It's important to consult. If we don't ask, then we don't know. So I think all CPD sessions should always ask for anonymized feedback all the time. And I think your CPD leader needs to control that. And even when other school leaders are presenting, they keep that data and they share the data at school leadership meetings, or the next time you have professional development, the results are displayed. And over a period of time, that culture becomes much more transparent. Capacity, so do you have shadow leadership programs, teacher training programs where people can learn on the job and volunteer maybe an hour a week to follow someone? So again, I've got all these resources on my site and some templates. So give me a shout if you're interested in shadow middle leadership programs built within your school, not necessarily government-led, and shadow leadership programs too. Number 4, does top work to achieve, but again, I would cite here, investors in people, if you can afford them, conduct a review, or at least the Teacher Development Trust, which is a bit more affordable for people watching from schools in England, where they actually map your needs and give you a framework. CPD vision shared, does it align with school priorities? Is it voluntary or conscripted where it's compulsory? My opinion, I think both are important here. Some voluntary, so you may want to have the first half an hour compulsory, then the last half an hour people go off and choose their own workshops. In my experience, those models probably work best where it's a mixture rather than always compulsory for the full time or always voluntary. It's good to get people together and then go off and choose. It's coherent, it links to day-to-day experiences. You have your practitioners in your school. I know this one's particularly obvious, but they share their experiences and their content. In all this content, well, you need a wide variety of ideas. You need some themes, you need perspectives from people to test ideas and come back and report. And most importantly, we know more than just one approach. Move on to halfway through the webinar now. How often does your CPD translate back into, so you're a school leader, the vast majority of people watching, when you get CPD, and I'm sure 1 or 2 school leaders still are teaching pretty much 20–30% of their contact time, particularly deputy heads, but assistant head probably 50% of their contact time. The CPD you receive internally, how much of it translates back into the classroom? Let me know your thoughts here on this poll. Okay, so we've got a mixed bag. 22% always. So I guess the people there leave a comment in the chat box for everyone to see. what CPD do you do? I know there's no such thing as a silver bullet, but how do you always get CPD translated back into the classroom? What strategies do you use to help the 11% of people that voted? So there's one or two out there watching who have CPD experiences, but it has rare impact back in the classrooms. It's particularly generic pedagogy, so it's really important to look at subject specific and in teams and in similar groups. So how often does your head of maths or maths department present CPD to the rest of the school? For example, these are the exam questions that our students are currently revising, and if we're all teachers of numeracy or literacy, how do we cope with our own subject knowledge, and how does that correlate with our own? Just two more on this bit of research. I'll see if I can get the question poll featured, and then this is the last one for you to have a say. Who features regularly when leading your CPD? So we've got a mixture of I asked you before, we've got workshops, someone standing at the front, but who is that? Who is the person leading the CPD in your school? Let's just get a sense of what you think. I'm really surprised to see that no one selected, and apologies, please shout at me through this chat box if I've only let you have one option, but I hope the poll allowed you to choose more than one. That there's no support staff here leading their own support staff. Working in a large secondary school, 120 support staff to try and meet teachers' needs, never mind support staff, is often, with the challenge of being time poor and lacking sufficient funds, a difficult ask. External supports, so the research supports, it's good to get an external person in. I would say that in my current position, but I always believed that even when I was a deputy head, and if you want a sense of value for money, you can get someone in from my networks, at least through social media. I would say you're looking at least £500 for someone to lead some good, decent professional development if you want some external support for a day. Obviously, do your research, but you divide that cost by the number of heads in your CPD budget, and if you are protecting 1%, then it's pretty much good value. And I wouldn't say it's something you do all the time. Interesting to see that 11%, so one or two people voted that the head teacher leads all the professional development. I wonder what the context is. What you're saying at the front or through the workshops or keynotes or whatever it is has to go back to the classroom, and we need to have resources where we can go off and experiment, whether I'm teaching year 1, year 6, maths or PE. And that's a real challenge. And what I've found on my travels is that all my experience of teaching or looking at cognitive science and psychology, behavior management, suddenly is very, very different when I'm working with year 1 pupils in a primary school. So it's really important if you're a school leader. Yes, we need to try and gather views of quality and evaluation across the school, but we must understand that teaching, learning and assessment is very different in different subject settings and with different ages. I know that, but what does the research say? Well, that's probably for another webinar. So here's some research, not for now, but I'll just signpost them for you to have a look at. 4 or 5 years ago, what makes great teaching? One or two of you may have looked at it. There's a hyperlink at the top of the screen. Again, it needs a capital T, T and R. This was quite instrumental alongside Professor Robert Coe, myself and a few other bloggers for removing graded lessons at Ofsted headquarters in 2013. There's loads more insights in here, and this also still informs part of my research tackling teacher myths, or at least education myths. The paper on the left is currently doing the circuit on social media. Principles of Effective Instruction by Barrett Rosenshine. This research is 40 years of teaching and learning research. It was published in 2002. Barrett Rosenshine passed away, I think, 2004 from memory. He's a professor at University of Illinois in Chicago. That area of the world. If you type this in my website, teachtoolkit.co.uk, the title, you've got my interpretation in the paragraph of what the research says, and then another paragraph, what it looks like in practice for the classroom. often academic research fails to bridge that gap between theory and what it looks like in the classroom. So these are the 17. My top tip for you after the exam season's over is look at this in more detail in departments as teachers rather than as a whole staff. Obviously, that would be a good starting point. Half an hour together, half an hour go off in your workshops. And what does this look like in our subject? Because this is good. This is a great piece of research. These 6 bullet points here are what are termed as poor proxies for learning. They're easily observed, but not really about learning. And my question here that I often pose is how many of those feature in your observations or your learning walks or part of your teacher development? Because yes, they are important aspects of school life, but they don't necessarily tell us anything concrete about how well pupils are learning. And that might be one to come back to or to ask me on an email, and I can talk to you through a voicemail. No problem at all. Number 6, in terms of diversity or input, unpicks these things. Yes, internal expertise, but also consider external support, a different lens, someone to give you support and challenge, perhaps someone that's not an Ofsted inspector, someone who can come in on common ground and be a kind of critical friend. The most successful, again, going back to that research by the one I quoted, how do you get that? Well, you need some specialists. It needs to link to your CPD priorities. These things need to be published. Again, I'll share a menu shortly. And it has to, and again, moving away from 3 binary targets to research-rich type questions would be how often does what you do at professional development link to actual student income outcomes? So let's see. Last point here, collaboration. Definition, how do we best collaborate? Some of you might be in isolation in a remote part of the country, others might be built within a large multi-academy trust with a lot more peer support. But problem solving is essential. I always advocate, in terms of being a CPD leader, be a problem finder, not a problem solver. And if you can tackle all these problems by finding them first, you'll have very few problems to solve. Okay. Leadership in effective leaders, they don't necessarily always lead. It's about nurturing people. So there's 2 things here I want to point out, particularly for school leaders watching, that must be distinguished. You've got the difference between procedural and learning. So how many of your CPD settings are information sharing type meetings rather than revisiting content and building on those materials? I think it's really important to distinguish between those 2 and always ask yourself the question, is it a meeting, information that can be read or heard, then save it for another time, such as a staff briefing. The next time someone comes to you and says, can I just say a quick announcement? Say no, ask them to share it at a staff briefing time instead. So here's a quick summary of what great CPD looks like, but then maybe ask the question, so what? Important to change policy, yes, but steer your focus towards latest research, your school needs. Use data, so staff voice, anonymised feedback, as well as pupil data to develop clear opportunities for future professional development. Number 3, let teachers choose. That's challenging, but often the answers lie within our school settings and in the UK, not necessarily in Finland and Shanghai, even though it's quite important to sometimes look elsewhere. It's a challenge, it's a real challenge, I know, but if we can even protect 0.5% of your overall school budget, then I think you're doing quite well. And although I've written here the days of nice lunch are over, back to that research on coaching, if we can construct CPD sessions where you've got teachers coaching one another, and I can signpost here Slough and Eton Business College School near Windsor is a school that I've been working with over the last couple of years. Every single teacher in that school is now coaching someone else with a cup of tea and a slice of cake, having structured feedback conversations rather than traditional insets. And it definitely seems to be moving there. Another school, Trumpeton Community College, soon to be rolling that out across the school. So there's some hallmarks. A great academic question. My supervisor asked me for my doctorate. I might say X, Y, Z. Their response is, so what? And it's a great question to pose with context, of course, around the leadership table without being perceived as being awkward or difficult. So I'm going to squeeze in some solutions here. We've got just under 20 minutes. I think it's important to look back on workload strategies. Apologise, this might be a bit blurred, but this was Nicky Morgan's workload research, 44,000 teachers. My research across teachers across the UK when I conduct anonymised feedback in my training sessions, so this is now 15,000 teachers in almost 10 countries, but broadly speaking, all the UK as well. Marking is driving teachers crazy. Now, obviously, you've got exam board regulations and what you must and mustn't mark at exam level. Let's forget that for a moment. What are we doing in terms of reducing the workload burden on teachers to keep them in your schools, to reduce the day-to-day marking burden, to switch to feedback, to look at verbal feedback, to look at modelling techniques, looking at marking and assessment in lots of different subjects, and how does that inform your professional development sessions? So it's, for example, in marking marketplace sessions and so on and so forth. I've been researching teacher mental health. I'll give you some anecdotal evidence to start with. So my Twitter feed, about 18 million people see my tweets every quarter, which is quite frightening. Every 3 months or so, I ask this question, who's driving teacher workload? So if you look at the question on the left, school leaders came back as the majority of response. I found that quite uncomfortable reading as a deputy head at the time. I've asked that question time and time again. I'll just flick through the slides. You can pause and look at them in detail. This one's currently live on Twitter. So I've mapped all the responses, and obviously I've now included the DFE policy and teacher habits. But the green line at the top, folks, if you're a school leader watching, is external pressures driving your decisions? And I would suspect they are, but teacher perceptions are that it's often the school leader driving teacher workload. So it's something to consider. Now, again, I won't dwell on these too much, but these are the types of messages in this red box that I receive every day. Obviously, I don't have the full context, but I signpost people to get some help or to go to official organisations. So part-time teachers going part-time to keep up with workload, notice no difference. Schools asking to complete detailed lesson plans with no extra time. This case, Mocksteads, and being observed for one-off performances. My experience, although graded lessons have been knocked on the head 6 years ago, my research, I suspect 30–35% of schools still choose to grade teachers. So how do you create a transparent, tailored and long-term? Well, this is an idea put on social media about 4 or 5 years ago, really easy fix. Here's a teaching staff version, here's a support staff version. Just take time to map all the CPD that all your staff are engaged with and what your school will support. Just put this on a portal for everyone to look at. Let maybe people complete an online form to make a request. Stick it on an A3 laminated sheet in the staff room or in where staff go to eat, and let staff see, because if they're too fearful to ask, at least they can see what's available. I think that's a really good place to start. In terms of the CPD timetable, well, when is the best place in the academic week to create CPD sessions? There are some schools now creating, they're getting rid of their staff briefing and turning these into 15–20 minute CPD sessions. I rarely suspect people will lead CPD sessions on a Friday afternoon. I have worked in some schools where NQTs, because the rest of the week is so crazy and busy, where CPD for NQTs is on a Friday night. I would imagine many of those NQTs will be exhausted and have very little chance of recalling any information. So you need to work out where the best place is to put teacher CPD. Again, some broad maths. If a kind of teacher at the top of the main pay scale, if you divide all the costs of their salary over 38 weeks of the academic year, without kind of tax and pensions and all sorts of things, you're looking at about £2,000 per lesson per teacher throughout the academic year. So if you gather all teachers together in a room, that's a huge cost. So you want to make sure that that 1 hour lesson or CPD opportunity is really good use of everybody's time. There's more ideas in my book. If you're really interested, I can happily post one or two, a copy, a nice healthy discount if you want some more ideas. It's all on my website. Other things that we did, so on the left here, we consulted our staff in terms of marking what we wanted teachers to do and what we didn't, and then we revisited this half a term later. There are silly things on here such as don't leave marking for 2 or 3 weeks. Obviously those binary decisions would still exacerbate teacher workload and aren't very helpful. So that's very old now. I think the dialogue's moved on far away from this. You'll be maybe familiar with the 5-minute lesson plan. There's great templates on my site you can download. There's about 35 versions of these now. Zonal feedback. So the yellow box is from a school in Nottinghamshire called George Spencer Academy. We look at one area, the teacher finds and fixes something for the student to redraft. They pose a question, written or verbal, and the student responds. There's no request for the teacher to then respond to the pupil's response as part of book look, checking and monitoring. It's simple, day to day, and when I say day to day, I don't mean every lesson, strategy for teachers to mark with impact. In the resources, I won't share it now because I don't want the technology fail. There's a nice little video of some of the work that I've done in the past, where you can see lots of ideas in a video format of some professional development going on. I'll just signpost a bit more research. If you know a colleague or your school still grades lessons, the measures of effective teaching project, this research was quite critical in abolishing schools doing these types of things where they come to observe you and the grade teachers in the box. So I always make it my mission to always share this, because we need to get to a place where all schools no longer grade teachers and then start to tackle initial teacher training when it comes to grading NQTs. If we want teachers to stay in the profession, we need to stop doing silly ideas. Number one at the top, if I come and observe you and give you an outstanding grade, the research shows another observer will come at a different time and a 78% chance will give you a different grade. So my top tip here for you is don't ask for a second opinion if you get outstanding. Word of warning, teaching and learning policies are important, but they're not statutory, so don't call them a policy. Just use it as guidance to inform your teacher development, your new staff induction. Don't publish it anywhere, because what would happen is it will come back to haunt you, and then inspectors may not, they may test what you've written and published, and then it might not play out in reality, particularly if you're working in a large secondary school where trying to achieve consistency is a never-ending remit and, dare I say, impossible to achieve. So don't set yourself up to fail. I've always advocated, if learning was a beer, probably the best policy is don't have a policy, just in terms of teaching and learning ideology, and then allow your professional development to immerse and embed ideas. Book that I read in my leadership career, Paul Bambrick Santoyo, so number of years old now, but there's a great pupil methodology here for structure and feedback. That informs my coaching sessions I now do with schools, where this 5-minute script with practice can be used with difficult conversations with mum and dad, Ross who's been a bit naughty in the classroom, or a 5-minute script that I want to do and use with you when I observe you, because we've got a meeting in 20 minutes, so I'll follow this methodology. There's lots more on my website. Give me a shout through my email, support@teachertoolkit.co.uk, or a voicemail. I'll send you the link. In fact, it's SpeakPipe, S-P-E-A-K, pipe.com/teachertoolkit. I can ping you back a voicemail. 3 bits we're working on. So on the left, verbal feedback in 7 state schools across the UK. In the middle, I'm looking at social media and how it influences education policy. And then on the right, what I've discovered in my schools that I've worked with across the UK. In terms, I won't go through all this, but this is a great framework. This is the framework that we're using to look at tackling some academic research, consider ethics, and how we would report the findings based on an impact framework, and some prior data. This simple methodology is something you might want to adapt if you're wanting your schools to be research rich and move to the school locations. That's them indeed. There's a range of number on roll pupil population, the names of the schools. This is the question without my support have constructed. My challenge from an academic point of view here would be, what do we define as engagement? Because that could be a poor proxy. Is it attendance to class? Is it behavior? Is it reward points? Is it responding to questions? So I am meeting with them tomorrow, and we hope to publish this research in September. Here, standing up in the bottom right-hand picture, who's working through all the ethics and the methodology, and you can see a picture of me with the teachers in the top right, looking at coaching conversations and constructing these frameworks that can be used for coaching teachers, but also for kids, or for conversations with parents. Familiar with this research practitioner development framework published by the Open University in 2002. This is a great framework to follow for building strategy. So if you want to look at developing a CPD strategy and you can't afford to buy in external services from teacher trainers or the Teacher Development Trust or investors in people, you may want to follow this methodology, starting with working as a researcher in the top left of this circle. So pause and play and have a look at this. You can find that. So if you just type on my website, Researching Practitioner Development Framework, you'll get a bit more thought and detail. I'm currently working with across the UK in terms of what are the challenges that all schools are facing. Well, they're all on the right hand side here. I haven't addressed funding because that's out of all of our hands. The only thing that we can do is keep challenging the narrative and talking to parents. And the Ofsted annual report published yesterday, and I've got a blog going out tonight if you're interested. Quite interesting that the vast majority of parents find out about their school's Ofsted rating from the school itself, rather from the Ofsted website. So wouldn't it be interesting if we stopped telling parents about our Ofsted scores? Maybe we could change the burden of workload that we may perceive to put on ourselves. So I showed you this head teachers say on my travels, they struggle to get access to research. So a top tip from me, save a pocket of cash, a TLR, for one member of your teaching and learning team to be the research lead who looks at the latest research, anything published, translates it into a 3-minute read for teachers, shares it in a CPD session, and then also shares it with parents. We're no longer marking homework because the research says X, Y, Z. Many schools are moving to this now, so it would be a top teaching and learning responsibility. Confident? Well, teaching and learning, behaviour and exclusions, again, lacking confidence in research, and interestingly, planning, which I found quite interesting. Well, pupil mental health, teacher well-being. How do I keep my teachers happy? If I keep them happy, then I can keep them in my school. Thank goodness those are the findings. But it's I can't get access to research. I'm too busy. I'm not interested, or it doesn't link to what I need to do back in my classroom. Also, how do I improve my own well-being on social media, or attending CPD at the weekend? Because the CPD in their own school doesn't meet their needs. Well, again, it's the same. It's their well-being and pupil mental health. Switching from 3 binary targets to touch appraisal inquiry type questions using coaching methodologies and professional standards for middle leaders, for school leaders. If you're stepping up for the next level of promotion, how do I know what to do? How do I get some shadowed support? How can I do it on the cheap, anything official or something that costs? Here are some questions from me. Again, tons more on my site. What do these things already? So let me just affirm that you are. Marking the marking burden, talk about assessment, share what Ross's books in year 7 look like in all these subjects across the school, and let staff talk about it and feedback. Try a teaching within your own school setting, but bring the public out. Simple websites such as Eventbrite allow you to ticket and email people that are attending before, during, and after teachers, but we don't yet know how to help them. Quick fixes don't work. Time on its own is not enough. It's not often what we do, it's how you do things. So I hope some of these ideas will help. With school funding, teachers need recognised CPD. I do think the Chartered College of Teaching, if you're watching from England, is going to help. The research ed movements. I'll signpost this today if you're interested. One-to-one coaching is the solution instead of large inset gathered sessions in your own school. I do believe that. It is possible to achieve. So if you're interested, drop me your thinking over the last 3 or 4 years. I'll signpost here again, leverage leadership. You've got peak performance, that red cover there. You've got Hidden Lives of Learners by Graham Nuttall, which is another 40 years of teaching and learning research. What teachers say often isn't what is received by pupils in class. Very fascinating. Teach Like a Champion, Doug Lemoff, some of you may have heard of. Loads of practical ideas in there. There is a link to my site, CPD Pack. You can pause and play and watch it back. There's my email address. If you want to send me a voicemail, it's speakpipe.com/teacher toolkit, or send me an email. I hope you found 1 or 2 new ideas, and get in touch if you would like some more support, more things to read. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much, everybody.